acres for soybeans and corn. We are going to ask Jerry Gidel what does that mean for the trade and for the farmer right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, what those record acres we will see on the screen mean for both the trader and the farmer?
Well, from the standpoint of 2021-22 crop year here in the U.S., the U.S. Producers out here are reacting to these very strong prices and actually probably had a bigger increase in corn acres here in people's minds because of the strength we've had here over the last 6 or 7 weeks here after the U.S. crop was determined to be smaller than expected. And so it's really put things in quite an interesting perspective. The weather this week in the U.S. probably also added to some of the enthusiasm going into the USDA's Ag Outlook updates. These are the ones they issued today here on Friday, the 19th, were basically economically derived. These are not producer survey type numbers and that, but they are a pretty good indication of how producers kind of react and how they see the market and that. And so it's been an interesting push here because of the recent strength in both corn and soybean prices. The U.S. producer here is pushing to a 92 million number, up from their 90.8 million that was the last year's numbers out there. On soybeans, they went all the way up to 90 million from what they expected last fall at 83 million. So we've had some very significant jumps here. Part of the spread there on corn and soybeans is the fact that some of the areas that had large prevent plantings last year, really northern plains, North Dakota, South Dakota, parts of the Southeast and Delta, are areas that have better soybean yields versus corn yields. So that's the reason why we've had maybe a higher sprint in soybean numbers here for the 2021 crop year. So definitely some wild numbers on plantings, and USDA then projected this, what they thought that would mean for ending carryover stocks today.
Yes, I just had a conversation with another analyst, and we came to the conclusion that with this sizable corn crop, the United States should be more reliant on the Chinese demand. Don't you think so?
Oh, well, we're going to be reliant on for the coming year. Yes, the one thing that was part of this release today was that the USDA was going to be keeping their exports for the coming year at a very high level. Then right now, the USDA's number back a couple weeks ago in the February update was only increased 50 million, which disappointed the trade. But because of the idea that they were going to kind of put this corn they recently bought into stocks instead of using it. But in general here, the usage numbers here for the coming year, and it kind of makes some sense here from the standpoint that the expansion of livestock and primarily hog production and pork production in China is going to continue to need to increase here in the coming year. And the fact that I think the one thing that I think most people have understood is at this point, the Chinese are looking at world supplies here, both from Ukraine and from us. South America has not traditionally shipped a lot of corn to China at this point. A lot of beans, but not corn. We'll see if that's the case this year. But in general, the corn market is still going to look at a very hefty 2.6 billion bushel exports for the coming year. The internal demand here for ethanol and feed demand is going to also stay pretty firm in that for the coming year. So definitely the interesting twist on it is that the USDA did end up decreasing their yield number for the coming year and their trend line after the fact that we had a very big drop in the final number here in the U.S. from 175 and a half down to 172, and that did bring down the trend line yields. I thought it could be 2 bushels. They went 1 bushel, but that's not surprising. The USDA is always a little more optimistic about where yields should be until ahead of the crop. But in general, good demand is anticipated on an ongoing basis because of the trends that are going on in Asia there on their meat demand.
Well, and what do you think would happen with the other producing countries in that scenario?
Well, I think the strong demand is definitely going to promote better opportunities for other places like Ukraine. I think Ukraine is going to probably step up a little stronger in the next spring when they look at the corn prices too. Interesting twist on Brazil this year and even Argentina is that we pretty well kind of etched in stone what can be coming out of both those areas. And I think the one thing in Brazil at this point, we're still struggling to get the soybean harvest through, and that we really are now past the optimum time here in Brazil to get your second crop corn in Mato Grosso do Sul, or excuse me, Mato Grosso up there in the northern areas. We're, usually that's February 15th. We're now, a few days afterwards, and we're still, comparatively speaking, this year's harvest in Mato Grosso, I don't have a hard figure on this, but I'd say it's probably in the 25, 27%. We'll get those numbers out yet this weekend or even maybe this afternoon. And that, but at the same time, last year we were 55, 60% done, and we had a lot more corn already planted. And I think that's a big factor because the fact that, as you well know, in the dry season happens in Brazil, it just kind of happens. It's a marching date, and so if you don't have your pollination done or your production set and going before that dryness really starts hitting, and it really starts ramping up after the 1st of May, and there's going to be a lot of corn in Mato Grosso and other areas that are going to be kind of right on the edge there. So I wonder, this 109 that the U.S. is looking at and the 105, 106 number that CONAB's looking at, those numbers are still vulnerable. They could still easily be down at 100 or something less than that, 100 million metric tons. And I think that's the feature in this thing, why the U.S. corn exports for 2021 could still be very strong because really you're the other support or producer of corn around a worldwide basis. Ukraine's stuff usually goes to Europe.
Well, and what can happen if the weather doesn't go perfect in the US? I think we are going to get a heck of a price in the second half of the year.
Yes, that's the real twist of this. Is that this really today's data? I've discussed it with some other people I know in the business and the analytical world, and we have just never seen these kind of beginning numbers that we are working with. The corn number we just discussed actually is only at 50 million, the projection higher than the current number, and this year's number of 1.5 billion in the U.S. is still vulnerable that we might see that number go lower because of the fact that exports could still be higher because of what happens in South America, and then turn around on the soybean side of the things. Boy, there's the minor type of adjustments for the coming year on U.S. domestic numbers for crush, and on the export side of things, they actually decreased exports for next year because, of course, there's the logic that next fall's output in Brazil is going to be higher because of what's going on, and I totally agree. But only shaving at 50 million bushels isn't much of an adjustment downward. And now we've got a carryover stock. The USDA is projecting at 145 million 145 million bushels, which is only 25 million higher than this year. And the wildest thing is that their projection of 145 plus our demand relationship gives us a stocks to use ratio at 3.2%. It's only 0.6% higher than this year, but the lowest number ever. Though that number is, I don't know, it's kind of tough to understand what that means. So the volatility of these grains between now and middle of the summer in the U.S. could be quite a roller coaster, I sense, in things going on. We're going to be watching the U.S. weather. Right now, we're going to be watching how things continue on the harvest in Brazil, how fast that happens, what impacts on our plantings for corn. Argentina will have to see how this dryness and the trend of La Nina impacts their outputs on corn and soybeans yet, which really are still to be determined over the next 6 to 8 weeks. They're double crop beans that are after wheat down there still that could still be out into even actually early April and have an impact on there. So there's a lot of things up in the air here on corn and soybeans prices. What's made today's kind of reaction a little hard to understand, but I think the investing public doesn't totally able to grasp some of the statistics that we're looking at, and the fact that we had early strength and it didn't follow through. It's a weekend. People are, deciding that I'd rather be on the sidelines and on corn and particularly wheat was the number today. I've never seen a number projected.
That's what I was going to ask. How much of a factor will be the hard red winter wheat harvest in all of that?
Well, today's the cold weather that was happening in the U.S., that was part of the strength we had this week too, was the concern that was going to impact our U.S. output through what they call winter kill. In essence, when wheat's dormant and it's really just kind of a green little patch of on the ground, and that if it doesn't have snow on it, it's vulnerable to cold because cold can sink into the kind of the cold or into the green thing laying on the ground there. In essence, it's the plant kind of waiting for spring to come. So, and that the impact of that is definitely is always, it's hard to judge, but in many cases it can be damaging. In essence, what happens is that the plant has been planted, but it won't be harvested and they might tear it up to be something else. And I think that is a possibility that some of that happened. It's hard to judge. And then the other twist of it is the fact that the major world producer here, Russia, had a kind of a dry fall, didn't get a great start to its plants, and its prospects for the coming year are down. I think the average was 85 million last year's crop that was harvested, and they're looking for a 78 million crop now. So we're already starting with a smaller crop over there. So that's another feature in this thing that actually adds up a little bit to support to the corn market because of the fact that if your price of wheat is strong enough, it can be used as a feed source, and it was getting some of that way recently because of the declining. Well, the measures that Russia did to try to slow down their internal prices has also weakened their price.
What do you expect for next week?
Well, I kind of feel like that this market's still got some support in here in this corn and soybeans because of the tightness of the USDA's projections. I know their projections. I realize that that their ideas on a piece of paper at this point. But really, you start looking at the reality of things. We're still going to be really watching closely, as I kind of mentioned before, the South American crops and that how they are harvested in Brazil, and what kind of conditions are helping the Argentine corn and soybean crops, and that. So in that environment, and also the U.S. here, we'll see what kind of bounce back we get here on transportation in the U.S. and how things get back to normal. There is supposed to be a warm up here. Now, the one thing that maybe added to some of today's profit taking was the projections on the 30 and 90-day forecasts of above normal temperatures, and at least nothing all that interestingly enough, heavy rains. There's some areas in maybe the upper Midwest that had above normal rains, but in general, the potential is for springs. If the National Weather Service's forecast is correct, then we're going to potentially look at what we're going to do here in the U.S. on how we get off with our plantings. That really is still probably at least 3 to 5 weeks away before we really get tied up into that mid-March or after. And that definitely April and May is the Midwest, but areas in south of St. Louis, across the country, and into the Southwest will be starting to also worry about it right now. Now, soybean side of things, we'll still be watching very closely the amount of soybeans that are be moving through the systems here and that. And I just noticed on today's export sales, we are at basically 2.2 billion bushels. And the USDA's only projection is 2.25, so that's only 50 million, and we got a long, long ways till September. So that's going to be watched closely when you have that kind of snug situation. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to ship everything right here, all that, but at the same time, that's right now. Here we are, first of March, and that we're going to have 7 more months to figure out how to sells 50 million. That's not very much soybeans to get parceled out here between now and the end of the crop year. So, but today's USDA numbers I think will provide a good base for us going forward, and we'll see what happens here. This market always needs good news, it seems like, to keep it going. Some days it's good and it doesn't even help, like today.
Should people rush to sell corn?
No, I don't think I do it on corn, particularly since the issues are where they're at on South America because of what's happened here. I still like my 80 or 90% scenario here. New crop wise, I still like the 20%. Soybeans are a little more interesting because we do have a big crop coming at us here, and that I guess I would be a little more willing to sell. Make sure that I was definitely up closer to that 90% level on old crop beans. New crop beans, boy, that's another big one. But I'd have to say I would, if we had some good recoveries here in this new crop prices, particularly if we were at opportunities at over $12, and that I would be definitely sure of being that 20-25% level. But I don't really want to right now. This whole world is still has a lot of questions to be answered.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Have a great week.
Thank you. We'll see what the exciting things the USDA can come up with us as we go into the 2021 year.